Grüezi ragazzi, bienvenue und willkommen to Cannabis Ciencia's LinkedIn Live sessions. I'm Christina, your moderator, and today we have a really cool presentation on energy balance and Tai Chi, actually. And I have with me here is Dr. Jahan Marcu, and you are muted again. Oh, there we go. Dr. Marcu, thanks so much for joining us. I think I'm very excited about your presentation and especially about the practical component at the end. But before we start, I just want to let everyone know Cannabis Ciencia is basically the company that hosts these, and it was put on by Viola Brugnatelli, so big thanks to her. And without further ado, Jahan, tell us about what you'll be talking about today, and then just feel free to dive right into it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So today we're going to be exploring balance and harmony through biology, talking about Tai Chi and the endocannabinoid system, and some fascinating research in this area. And one of the reasons I'm able to talk about this is with support from the Physicians Research Center, where we do clinical research, as well as some data collection efforts with our Buds Info platform and clinical education. So today, just to dive right in, I'm going to share with you what is Tai Chi. We'll talk about these concepts of resistance, homeostasis, harmony, balance, and we'll talk about the endocannabinoid system, how the two might relate, what sort of research is going on looking at things like lipid metabolism and Tai Chi, and exploring a few movements at the end, time permitting. So a little follow along, easy flow version of Tai Chi. You won't have to know anything. You could follow along if you want. We're going to spend a little bit more time talking about Tai Chi and its context, because I think it's helpful to understand why it was created and how it's kind of used and why people use it, to understand why people might study the endocannabinoid system in Tai Chi. So we'll spend a little more time talking about that. I assume if you're here, you know a little bit about the endocannabinoid system, a little bit about cannabis. So I'm going to speak to you at a little bit of a high level, assuming you've got some basic information. So what is this Tai Chi Kung Fu thing that you've heard about? What is its goal? And there are many different perspectives, and we can take kind of an entirely Western view of it. But again, I feel like immersing ourselves a little bit of the traditional information, we can appreciate what the intentions were of the ancient practitioners. So what do we mean, especially Westerners, when we say Tai Chi? Tai Chi is actually Tai Chi Chuan, which is an extremely unique and complex system that involves, therapeutic and spiritual disciplines, martial and meditative aspects. It's known for its gentle, flowing movements that promote balance, flexibility, and coordination. It's also thought of as an internal martial art, emphasizing things like breathing and self-cultivation according to Taoist principles. But it is widely practiced for different health benefits. So meaning, if you thought of it only as a martial art, a system of grappling or self-defense, you'd be partially correct, but you would miss the big idea, the big point. And if you thought of it as only an energy-based longevity or health practice, you'd be, again, partially correct, but you would miss the point. And if you think of it only as a philosophy that encourages what we call harmony and balance, again, you'd be right, but you would miss the point. The practice is supposed to be kind of guided by nature and trying to find balance and harmony in every situation. It is set up with principles that are enforced through movements to help create guidance or a path towards a certain kind of life. And the ancient masters discerned that to change human behavior, it takes a lot of mixtures of growth on every level. That's, cognitive, emotional, physical, energetic, spiritual. You have to have growth in all these areas to start to change human behavior. So Tai Chi had a lot of context when it was first invented or created. There were centuries of war combined with reoccurring natural disasters that really made the ancients aware of the consequences of ignoring things like personal growth, as well as having no practical means of nurturing that growth. And in their opinion, the consequences of not, again, having means or personal growth or emphasizing that in people was massive human misery, oppression, the stagnation of society and civilization, like no growth going forward. So Tai Chi was created to be this proactive activity, this proactive force for good, to teach things like the powerful, to teach the powerful the benefit of being compassionate or benevolent towards the powerless, to help the strong stand up for the weak, really kind of to ingrain these principles to teach anyone how to be the best they could be, and to give everyone a path towards living a long and happy life. But there's a catch. Living that type of life and going down that path takes training, right? There is so much going on in the chaos of our lives that pulls us towards imbalance, right? That we might need some new skills or guidance to help us start to practice those things that we need to do, whether it's, you want to eat healthier, you want to stay off social media, whatever skill, whatever thing you're trying to develop. And that gets us to just one principle I'm going to share about Tai Chi. And that's, we get best at what we practice most, and we get worse at what we practice least. And this is sort of a simple lesson or principle from Tai Chi. And so it goes something like this. The physical skills that we practice the most are the ones we eventually become best at. I don't think that's any surprise, right? If you practice swinging a bat to hit a ball and you practice a lot, you'll get really, really good at it eventually. The lifestyles and habits we practice the most generally become the ones that we benefit the most from. Our perspectives, our attitudes, our social behaviors, the ones that we practice the most are the ones that become second nature to us and the ones others come to know us by. And we'll revisit this concept when we talk about homeostasis a little bit later, because in Tai Chi, sometimes it's referred to as resistance, and you have to overcome your resistance or your homeostasis level to learn new skills. So where do all these principles and things come from? They come from a collection of works called the Tai Chi Classics. There's a lot of writing, poems, essays, treatises, all written by masters in either Tai Chi or philosophy. And they're grouped into organizing principles and essential principles. Chong Sang Feng is generally regarded as like one of the creators of Tai Chi, founders of it. There are different styles of Tai Chi practice. There's Yang style, which maybe you've seen in the Olympics, where people will do a short form or long form routine, usually wearing a silk uniform while they go through these slow movements around a large space. There are also group practices where people will go through sort of sequences, repetitive movements. Again, you don't have the whole gym to yourself, so you'll have to share the space and move carefully. But typically this focuses on repetitive flowing movements. There are also some people might say a little more practical applications. There are push hands competitions where it's a kind of Tai Chi competition between two people with the goal of off balancing another person. And there are different types of push hands competitions, but this is just an example. If you're interested in learning more, there's a couple of resources I'd recommend. One is the Tai Chi Companion, written by David Dorian Ross. They're great courses, essentials of Tai Chi and Qigong. These first two cost money. The Tai Chi Made Easy videos on YouTube are free. And then if you're interested in learning more about joining a practice, this website will give you an idea kind of about that. But those are just some helpful resources that I have found in exploring this practice. So to be able to do some of the movements depends on the understanding and development of balance. Balance and harmony are the ultimate goals of this practice known as Tai Chi. And balance is a skill, and balance is at the heart of understanding a lot of the theories around Tai Chi. It is also the basis of the philosophy, the physical skills, and the basis of sort of the spirit of the practice. So much about the Tai Chi philosophy depends on balance and harmony. Harmony is the ultimate goal of Tai Chi. And so you have physical balance, you have a state of mind known as harmony, and that is where these concepts of effortless action come from. And when we talk about resistance and homeostasis in a little bit, we will start to weave some of these together. But balance and harmony is the ultimate goal of Tai Chi in yourself, in your life, in your perspectives. And of course, talking about Tai Chi would not be complete without talking about a depiction of the Tai Chi 2, which is a fancy way of describing the Tai Chi symbol. You may have seen this symbol. It is definitely out there. It's been somewhat commercialized. You see it depicted just everywhere, but this depicts how yin and yang actually relate to each other. And it's not actually a circle. It is a wheel. It spins, right? Because harmony is not about stagnation. Harmony is about movement, right? The light exchanging with the dark, dark exchanging with the light. What once was midnight becomes daybreak. What was once negative becomes positive, and so on. It's this interaction of yin and yang. And they say that if you look at this image long enough, you will actually see it move. And if you see it move, it means that you have great potential as a student. So if you see it move, probably means you should practice some Tai Chi. But when we talk about the interaction of yin and yang, what do we really mean, right? Tai Chi really kind of means harmony. And when you break down the words, like Tai can be translated as meaning like ultimate, bigger than big. And Chi is not the same word as energy, but means kind of like a center, a ridge pole, something holding something up. So it's like the ultimate balance to hold things up. It's just one kind of translation. And in ancient Chinese philosophy, the harmony meant the combination of yin and yang. Their interplay is what makes harmony. And in finding, restoring, maintaining balance and harmony, that is sort of the purpose of practice. And again, half of mastering the Tai Chi practice and movements and philosophy is mastering a path for balance and harmony. And the principle goes something like this. When you're in harmony and balance, everything works better. Your body is more powerful, right? If you are kind of leaned over to one side and trying to move, it's not as easy. You're not as kind of powerful as you are kind of in a more neutral stance, right? Your movements are more graceful, coordinated. Your thoughts are more coherent. Relationships are better. Everything works better when you're in harmony. And when you fall out of harmony and balance, you start to drift away. Everything starts to get worse, starts to get more difficult. You can definitely, if you've ever been off balance physically, you'll know that things can get difficult really quickly. So another way to talk about this aspect is effortless action comes up a lot in Chinese philosophy, in Tai Chi, in Taoism, this idea of sometimes called Wu Wei. In modern times, it's the parallel probably to that is like a flow state or flow-like experience, which is its whole area of research. And so one aspect of this balance and harmony is helping people reach what some call a flow-like state. And but file all that away for later. The ancient masters made it very simple. They said, if you are in balance, you suffer less. If you are out of balance, you suffer more. Whether that's emotionally, intellectually, physically, energetically, spiritually, and so on, their kind of personal, communal, and global solution to life's challenges was in the restoration of harmony. So, what are these skills that people develop to bring about physical and mental balance and harmony? It's certain skills they have to practice. And you might look at someone standing on one foot with their arms spread out saying, that's maybe easy for them. It's not easy for me. But if you ever attend a practice, you'll hear probably a master or instructor say, Tai Chi is easy. It's your resistance that makes it hard. And I think we find this true with so much stuff. If you ever started doing a new exercise program or learning a new skill, your body seems to resist doing the movement. Your mind sometimes resists memorizing things, right? Your mind and body resist. We have to sort of practice and train it, right? And then in the philosophy that we're talking about, they say when you can let go of resistance, it can become very easy. Well, that's great if you know you are resisting and you can overcome it. But there's also a challenge that you don't even know when you are resisting at times. You don't intend or mean to resist, but your unconscious body, your physiology, your mind are resisting. And this is a property of our physiological system that tries to keep us exactly as we are right now. Our bodies try to resist any change. And another term for this is homeostasis, and it serves a purpose, right? Because if we changed all the time our body and had no set point of what we were supposed to be like, we would get injured very easily. We would not be able to resist things like disease, illnesses, viruses, any other microbes that might be wanting to do us harm. And mentally, we'd be so swayed by any idea or shiny object that we wouldn't have any sort of set point values or judgment. That too is part of resistance and homeostasis. And so the downside of homeostasis is that it is by definition a form of resistance. And so when you try to learn something new, whether that's a new skill, memorize some facts, change behaviors, as much as you might practice and learn, your body drags you right back to where you were before. And I think as we move forward and talking about things like, addiction or other disorders, I think this starts to make a lot of sense. But the only way around changing homeostasis, changing that resistance, is through practice, to continue to challenge our resistance and to practice again and again. And little by little, you begin to adapt. It's like eventually our mind or our physiological system gets the message and it's like, okay, you want to change, I will let you change. And then suddenly, boom, there's some new adaptation, there's some new change. Maybe you've leveled up a new skill, a new ability. Your homeostasis level has sort of changed. Your resistance level has changed. There's a new normal, as it were. So the endocannabinoid system is often referred to as a homeostatic regulator of physiological processes. And again, homeostasis is not about being static. It's a dynamic adaptation, right? If we think of standing on one foot, there are constant micro adjustments that are always happening to keep you upright. And the ECS is deeply involved in how cells communicate under changing conditions. However, there are experiences, chronic stress, poor habits that are normal with the endocannabinoid system can shift to a dysregulated state, like a thermostat set too high. Now, we know that certain things, um, there are markers of the endocannabinoid system that raise and fall according to different things. Like we know that, like with exercise, with general exercise, like aerobic exercise, yoga, anandamide 2-AG, the endocannabinoids will increase. We know that, when you're eating or before you eat or before you go to sleep or when you wake up, we have a interplay of endocannabinoids increasing and decreasing in response to responding to appetite and how much sleep you get. There's also effects on things like trauma. And so Dr. Matthew Hill did a study or published a study in 2013 where survivors of the World Trade Center attacks in New York, when looking at them 10 years later, all had elevated levels of anandamide and 2-AG. Their body had adapted to a traumatic event, maybe to the stress or anxiety. There's also more transient effects. And on a lighter side, there was a study on arousal, and they showed people adult films and measured endocannabinoid levels. I'm not sure what the hypothesis was founded on, but they did find that what they showed people, what they were experienced to, could measurably change the endocannabinoid system. And we know that this system is being targeted in things like disease and addiction. And homeostasis isn't just a scientific term, it's also a principle of returning to the center as well. So let's talk a little bit about the endocannabinoid system. We have a model here, and this is a model actually of a politician's brain. And we know it's an accurate model of a politician's brain because there's only 2 functioning brain cells. And so the endocannabinoid system works like this. We have some neatly packaged neurotransmitters that are being released into the synaptic cleft from the presynaptic neuron down to the postsynaptic neuron. And if there's, maybe there was only supposed to be a small amount of glutamate being released to signal and there's too much, this triggers the on-demand synthesis of endocannabinoids that can go up and target the CB1 receptor sort of in a retrograde signaling fashion that can inhibit the release of neurotransmitters, sort of responding to overstimulation. Maybe you could think if there is some signaling here that's causing a seizure or negative thoughts or something like that, and the endocannabinoid system saying, whoa, that's too much activity, time to slow it down, time to bring back a little balance. And of course, exogenous cannabinoids can also target these receptors and have the same effect of inhibiting neurotransmission. The trick with it is, with exogenous cannabinoids, is getting them to go to the right place. So in an effort to start to weave these things together, if we look at clinical research, drug development research, basic and clinical research on the endocannabinoid system in Tai Chi, we find that why we're interested in them, whether for research purposes or where patients might be interested in them, is because of the outcomes related to mood, pain, stress, sleep, and inflammation. I find it kind of interesting that these 2 things are so aligned in why research is interested in them and why people are interested in modulating their endocannabinoid system, whether it's with cannabis products or even the pharmaceutical companies are developing different FA inhibitors. And similarly with Tai Chi, there's been a lot of research looking at its effect on mood and pain and stress, sleep, and inflammation. There's a fair amount of research on things related to arthritis and osteoarthritis, and Tai Chi. So I found this kind of an interesting lineup and similarities, but I'm not the only one who's found this. It has not been lost on researchers or on marketers, this kind of relation or similar almost philosophical undertones of the endocannabinoid system and things like Taoism and Tai Chi. This one here on the right with the CBD and THC kind of makes me laugh because it makes me think of the hemp farm bill in the United States. And maybe they made this subconsciously because here we have the CBD that eventually gets turned into THC, which is basically what's happening right now in a lot of places. People are converting CBD to other cannabinoids. Can't make this stuff up, I guess. These researchers, and maybe this is interesting point, is one of the authors of this paper that created this figure was on my thesis committee many years ago. So maybe that's where I got this influence from. But I find this very, very interesting. So we have our CB1 receptor in blue here and CB2 receptor information in orange. And what I really just want to draw your attention to is the active and inactive. So when we want more activity per se to target CB1, it's generally thought, okay, if we can hit CB1, we can reduce pain, symptoms of epilepsy, target neurodegenerative disorders. However, there's also a role for having a hypoactive endocannabinoid system, and that might be in treating obesity, addiction, and fibrotic disorders, which also may have a relation to neurodegenerative disorders. Similarly, for CB2 receptors, you want them potentially to target them to treat pain, inflammation, and neurodegeneration. And you may want to inactivate them for certain types of cancers or things like renal fibrosis. And there's a whole range of compounds that have mixed efficacy at CB1 and CB2. Right here in the center is the class of compounds known as THC, which hits CB1 and CB2 pretty efficiently. And then as we start to go in either direction, we might see some favoritism and things like that. So very interesting graphic from this paper entitled Crystal Structure of the Human Cannabinoid Receptor, CB2. So we're going to talk about this pilot study that came out that I thought was very interesting. And this pilot study explored 8 weeks of Tai Chi practice, of a Yang style practice, and how it affected circulating levels of endocannabinoids and oxylepins in postmenopausal women with knee osteoarthritis. And the researchers basically wanted to know if a mind-body practice could actually influence internal chemical signals related to pain, inflammation, and even brain function. So it's a really great study. I'm not going to go through every figure because it'd be like 50 slides of just reams of data. So I encourage you to check it out if you have access to it. So on the left here, we have oxylipins, and on the right, we have endocannabinoids, which most of us are familiar with. If you're attending this talk, I assume you know what an endocannabinoid is. But what's interesting about these is that they are sort of competitors. And so they both come from things like arachidonic acid. They use separate enzymatic pathways. And so if you're making a lot of oxylipins, you're using a lot of the precursors that you would use to make endocannabinoids. And if you're making a lot of endocannabinoids, then they're getting a lot of the precursors that would be used to make oxylipins. It might be, I would say this, it would be difficult under the current framework or understanding of molecular biology, according to these researchers and others, to have all of these things go in the same direction, because again, they require the same precursors and potentially divergent molecular pathways. So it's a little bit of an economy there. So who was in this study? It was a small study. They used 12 people, and about average age was 64. What was interesting is that they were all generally rated their health as good. 2 of them had a total knee replacement. More than half of them drank alcohol. There was history of cigarette use. Some used pain medication, and there were other medications that people were using. There were so they tried to control some of these factors that can potentially influence the results. And so jumping into the key findings. So here we see some actual data. And what's interesting is some things like anandamide was actually decreased from about 2.68 to 2.10 nanomolar. LEA and OEA, these endocannabinoid like compounds, also dropped. So sort of the takeaway here from their research is Tai Chi may help regulate these molecules. Maybe under certain conditions, it helps to, the endocannabinoid system goes in a little bit of a hypoactive state. There's less activity. And you see it fairly consistency, some reaching statistical significance. But again, it's a small number. But it was interesting to see this trend of it's definitely not increasing across the board in endocannabinoid activity like you would expect for other exercises like weightlifting, yoga, or even meditation. So interesting finding here. And what they did find is that table 3 here shows how 8 weeks of Tai Chi practice actually influenced oxylipins, which are lipid-derived molecules that act like messengers in inflammation and pain pathways. And I think the most striking findings here are with PGE1 and PGE2, and particularly the type 2 is a key player in inflammation, joint pain, fever, and it dropped from 15 to 2 nanomolar. This, I think, is kind of a big deal. And this is, authors would say evidence that the Tai Chi practice may help reduce inflammation. On the flip side, we see several other increases in oxylipins. Now, these compounds here, like the 12-HEPE and the protectin DX, and these molecules aren't necessarily inflammatory. They are derived from things like arachidonic acid and omega-3 fatty acids, but they belong to a class of lipids that help the body shut down the inflammatory response when it's no longer needed. So it's sort of the cleanup crew letting you know, hey, we're done with the inflammatory response. So these ones up here are involved with, making the inflammatory response happen. And these are sort of sometimes thought of as signaling that the inflammatory response is over or it's going away. It's in resolution. So what's interesting here in the big picture is that we're seeing a shift in the balance of lipid mediators, down regulating harmful inflammation signaling molecules and activating compensatory or regulatory pathways. And I think it's interesting we talk about just conceptual terms like homeostasis and balance. We think, is this the way the body sets a new homeostatic point, right? For individuals with chronic pain. Maybe you don't need the endocannabinoid system revved up all the time. Maybe you don't need these lipid systems revved up going full speed all the time. Maybe they need to reset at times. Additionally, beyond blood markers, the study linked oxylipin and endocannabinoid changes to subjective pain levels and brain functional connectivity. And table 4 is massive. I could have put together so many slides kind of discussing that, but again, I'll leave some surprises for you to look at. But they looked at things like the WOMAC, which is the Western Ontario and McMaster University's osteoarthritis index for pain and stiffness. They looked at visual analog scales for pain. They also looked at things like the brief pain inventory scale. And they also had looked at resting state functional MRIs in the amygdala, the medial prefrontal cortex. And basically, what's interesting is PGE2, a pro-inflammatory molecule, showed a negative correlation with pain, meaning as PGE2 levels dropped, pain improved. Similarly, these compounds here, the 12-HETE also showed negative correlations with stiffness and average pain. So Tai Chi did appear to reduce these pro-inflammatory lipids, resulting in, statistically measured lower pain and stiffness scores. Interestingly, DHEA, derived from DHA, and LEA, linoleal ethanolamine, were negatively correlated with several pain score metrics. And what's interesting is higher levels of DHEA and LEA were associated with better physical and emotional functioning. So the functional connectivity between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex and emotional pain processing centers did show positive correlations with certain oxylipids and certain endocannabinoids or endocannabinoid-like compounds. So what the authors state basically is that THC appears to reduce a lot of pro-inflammatory lipids, both oxylipins and endocannabinoids, and that these biological changes not only affect pain perception, but also influence some brain connectivity patterns tied to pain regulation and emotions, which they measured with MRI. MRI. So to kind of sum up what we're talking about here, 8 weeks of Tai Chi led to a decrease in pro-inflammatory oxylipins, shifts in endocannabinoids, decreases in anandamide, decreases in arachidonyl glycerol. And there were correlations between lipid markers, reduced pain, improved brain function, and changes in brain connectivity as measured with their system. Which I think the interesting finding for me here is that when you combine all these different aspects of Tai Chi, movements, philosophy, internal, external disciplines, you don't see what you normally see, at least according to these researchers, with things like yoga, running, and meditation studies. You don't see a drastic increase in anandamide or 2-AG. So I found this really interesting. And so maybe conceptually, as this relates to this Tai Chi practice, right? It might be thinking about putting the system in a less reactive state. This might be surprising, but like at least conceptually, it's a shift towards lower inflammatory tone, and maybe and it definitely aligns with the philosophy, I think, of new homeostatic thresholds. So perhaps the philosophy here could be that the body's adapting, recalibrating, not just revving up a bunch of lipid molecules to tackle a problem by producing a bunch of endocannabinoids, which I feel like so much is like the solution is, well, how can we get more exogenous cannabinoids to the target? How can we get more endocannabinoids to the target? When sometimes it might be that we need to adjust the baseline. And I think even with concepts like addiction and disease, where we see an imbalance, this might be useful in conditions where you need to, say, lower the activity of the endocannabinoid system. Just conceptually, again, in obesity, there is a lot of activity of the endocannabinoid system. And if you had a way to reduce that, that would be really helpful for helping people to control appetite and change behavior. So this pilot study did report that changes in circulating endocannabinoids and oxylipin levels altered some brain connectivity in the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, reduced pain and stiffness, and leading to improved physical function. So the study sample size was small, but it does provide the first examination of the effect of Tai Chi exercise on an extensive plasma biomarker analysis, coupled with brain function, instructional connectivity in knee osteoarthritis patients. So the sources and the data indicate that exercise, meditation, and specifically Tai Chi are associated with modulating the endocannabinoid system. While, just to reiterate, exercise can typically increase endocannabinoids, and meditation has been shown to increase endocannabinoids. Tai Chi has been shown to modify levels of specific lipids, but it seems to influence the endocannabinoid system in a different direction. And this is, I find, fascinating because endocannabinoids and oxylipins share the same precursors. So this suggests potential competition for substrates or shared enzymatic pathways. And in the spirit of harmony and balance, these compounds are both part of a complex pattern of pro and anti-inflammatory signals, and they're produced to keep us in homeostasis and therefore important in relation to afflictions with suspected inflammatory origin. So I want to say thank you for your time and attention for this unique presentation. It was definitely a lot of fun to put it together and share it with you. Please feel free to reach out to me by email if you have any questions or comments, or want some of the resources that are mentioned here. And
is it time yet for our exercise? I'm
yes.
ready. Okay.
So in just a minute, I'm going to stand up in my little studio here, and we're going to not so much focus on the foot movements of Tai Chi, which you can see here from these posters are from a group called the Jade Lady. But we'll be focusing more on some of the hand movements and doing just a simple flow style for a few minutes to give you a little nibble, a little taste of what Tai Chi is all about. So, well,
Okay, I'll remove the slides, and then I'll remove myself, and I'll be back after the exercise, okay?
okay. All right, we'll just get started in just a little minute. I'm going to have to stand up. So let me see if these attach.
Should we all be standing?
Yeah, I think go ahead and stand up if you'd like to join in the fun. All right. So loosen up those clothes, right? So I'm just going to adjust the camera just a little bit and we'll get started. So just a little housekeeping. You don't need to know anything. There's nothing to memorize. There's nothing to perfect. Just follow along if you'd like. I don't care if you do or not. That's another Tai Chi principle, I guess, the I don't care principle. I don't care if your hand goes over here and my hand goes over there. Don't worry about left or right. Just find yourself in a nice neutral stance. I'm going to start with the feet open. And just to slow us down and get us in the rhythm of Tai Chi, I'm just going to take a deep breath, breathing in and breathing out. And breathing in, I'm just going to let my arms float up to the side. Just floating, floating, floating. And kind of just like some wings on a bird, just let them melt and float down. Just some soft movements. Letting the hips and knees soften. Breathing in and breathing out. That's it. Just one more little warm-up movement, breathing in and breathing out. All right, and stay with me. We're just going to flow right into another movement. My arms round out like I'm hugging a big tree, and I gather in and sink the chi. That's the name of this movement for our flow style practice. Just gathering in, and everything just floats, relax, and softens. One more time. Gathering in some of that energy and rooting down. And stay with me as my arms float out. One hand's going to scoop underneath, and one hand scoops on top for our hold the ball or embrace the moon position. And then just letting that moon float away. and switch sides. The other hand scooping on top. And it's not a moon you keep to yourself. It's floating out in front of you, right? You're holding this big round spherical object. Still breathing, right? One more. Embrace the moon position, one of the foundational movements of Tai Chi. So as I embrace the moon here, I'm going to just shift my weight a little bit. And I'm just going to take a gentle step into my corner. Just coming out and letting the hands push out in front. And then everything kind of just rolls back. Kind of like you're getting underneath and pushing out. And everything is soft and bendy. I'm not straightening out my legs completely. And this is sometimes referred to as push the mountain. Well, to stay balanced, we have to do the other side. So I'm just going to bring it all in, taking a gentle step in, shifting your weight to the other side. If you've done Tai Chi before, you'll know the Tai Chi step and the catwalking step as you push out and slide back or roll back. Just gentle movements, nothing fancy. Very good. All right, and stay with me on this one. I'm just going to turn my palms up like I'm receiving a little gift from the sky. I'm going to come forward, sliding wrist over wrist, and it doesn't matter which one's on top. I'm just going to slide them apart. And like most things in life, this has many different names, sometimes called crossing the points or stirring the cauldron, right? The purpose of this is to awaken energy for the practice. Just a gentle stirring motion. One more time. And then I'm just going to bring this foot back in, shift the weight, rooting down this foot, so I can then step out to my corner. And one time I'm going to push out. And then the palms turn upward. And I slide forward. And I turn to cross the points or stir the cauldron. Still breathing, right? Tai Chi and breathing go really well together. All right. And then I'm going to bring everything back to center and go back to the beginning with sinking the chi. And we'll do one last movement together. I'm going to let my hands float out to the side. And this hand is just going to drift across. And the two hands change position. And I just shift and turn and float for a movement called cloud hands or cloudy hands. Hands like clouds. And it's not an optical illusion. I am shifting my weight from one foot to another. So if you ever see people doing the park, you will probably see cloudy hands. It's an old favorite, classic movement. All right, now I'm just going to bring it back to center. I'm just going to hug the corner, bring it back, coming back to center, inhaling and opening. And everything kind of drifts back together, gathers up, and sync the chi. There we go. Just a little taste of a flow style practice of Tai Chi. So uh, I hope you had some fun with that, at least watching it.
Yeah, I'm glad I wasn't on camera because I kept bursting into laughter at your jokes. You can't be joking during this practice. I'm like, where was I?
Well,
No,
Tai Chi
but
is, well, that's, I think, one of the reasons why it's relaxing. It is typically, very playful. There's a lot of jokes. There's a lot of trying to, disarm you and get you to relax and things like that. So.
Yeah, very, very cool. Thank you so much. And I forgot to mention that you're actually a certified Tai Chi instructor, right?
Yes, yeah, that's.
How did that come about?
It's a great question. So several years ago, I was training martial arts, and I was just feeling so sore and beat up all the time from these like kickboxing classes and other classes, and I used the internet and I found these videos and ended up just taking an online course, and I found it to be really a great way to focus in the mornings, because how do you say, I have a bit of like a monkey mind where I'm just swinging from branch to branch all the time. And so I needed something to kind of slow me down, and just sitting and meditating, just like I was too much going on. And so this movable meditation really was really, I found it enjoying. So I just kept pursuing it. You kept practicing, and eventually connected with a group that offered certification, and it just kept going, and now I've gotten to teach online, teach in studios. Actually, I've been teaching monthly at a Taekwondo academy. I mean, here are people who do kicks all the time, and they want to practice some balancing exercises and that internal sort of discipline.
And just, I don't know if Marie-Eve is watching, but I just wanted to see if you have any input on like Tai Chi for people who are in a wheelchair. Because
yeah, absolutely. So there is seated flow. There's like seated yoga and seated flow, and you can do, a lot of those movements from a chair. Maybe that should have been the flow style I showed today. But similarly to how, we were doing these positions, people will sit a little bit towards the end of the chair, not so their backs totally in, and sit up in a nice neutral alignment and best that you can. And again, you're just kind of doing the same movements like this, or if we're doing the cloudy hands, we're doing them from a seated position. And so that's absolutely true. And you can find videos on YouTube about seated Tai Chi and other practices. Definitely. I'd encourage it. I've conducted only one or two online sessions from seated, but there are people who are really, really good at conducting those sessions. I would suggest checking it out.
Yeah, I'll definitely look into it. Thank you very much. Let's get to some questions. Let's get back to the science of it. I see Viola had a question. Let me just pop that in there. And I think this was about one of the earlier studies you had presented. Was it in the cerebrospinal fluid that you saw the increase? Or?
No, they measured it in blood, so it was not directly measured that way. That would be kind of great to know, I think. But no, this was so blood markers for these different lipids.
So what's the difference? Like in the CSF, you'd get to see more of what as opposed to in the blood?
I think there's different ways you could think about it. I would think about it more. It's more kind of localized. What's happening in the command center, right? In the brain and spinal cord, like what is happening there where we have the most cannabinoid receptors. when it's in the periphery, it's kind of in the circulatory system. We're talking about looking at it like, okay, what's happening in the blood versus in very, very specific sites or more specific regions. And I think if they, like if they could somehow trace radioactive anandamide, maybe they'd see it in some imaging software.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And it would be interesting to see, to compare both, right? Like the levels in the CSF and in the blood.
So like if they're talking about knee inflammation maybe, or inflammation of joints, looking in the blood might be a great way of saying, okay, where are the inflammatory markers? But if you're trying to maybe make a case about what's happening in the mind or perceptions of pain, definitely looking in the cerebral spinal fluid, I think would be more appropriate. But I think they were looking for kind of global markers of changes in the inflammatory response. Because again, the people in the study had have been diagnosed with knee osteoarthritis, and we're looking for treatments specifically for that.
And then something that connected in my head as I was going through the second edition of Viola's book, The Principles of Clinical Cannabinology, is the role of THC in bone health. Because you mentioned this was a study done on osteoarthritis. So can you comment on that a little?
Yeah, a little bit. So another great sort of yin and yang relationship are osteoblasts and osteoclasts. And osteoblasts make bone, osteoclasts chew up bone. And you have to keep them in balance because you don't want to make too much bone, because if your bones get all, too sort of stiff, then they get more brittle. And whereas you don't want too much osteoclast dissolving bone, because then they get porous and they get, brittle as well. And this interplay of osteoblasts and osteoclasts will actually, every 8 to 10 years, you kind of get a new skeleton from this interplay of these two cell types. Now, you can have conditions where over time, maybe the osteoblasts stop making as much bone, and the osteoclasts are still going at their same speed, or maybe they're going faster for some reason. What's interesting about cannabinoids is that cannabinoid receptor stimulation can stimulate osteoblasts to make more bone and inhibit osteoclasts. So in you can even see this in the mice with mutated cannabinoid receptors. They have poorer bone health. And there's even in human population genetic studies of CB2 receptors, particularly, that are associated with more severe age-related osteoporosis. And this has been looked at in different populations, like in French populations, Japanese population, I think even in Eastern Europe. They've looked at these CB2 polymorphisms and bone health. And so the concept goes something like this. Exogenous cannabinoids like THC could stimulate osteoblasts and help improve bone health, or bone strength, or maintaining that balance or harmony between osteoclasts and osteoblasts, because cannabinoid receptor stimulation, which is known to inhibit immune cells, right? And osteoclasts are a type of immune cell, and so they can inhibit their activity. And this was some work that I did in grad school, was on bones and cannabinoids, and we worked with genetically modified animals and that didn't have CB1, CB2, or CB1 and CB2 receptors, and looked at ways of trying to modify even healthy bone cells as well. So I think it's definitely interesting. Now, most people aren't just consuming straight THC. There's other things in the cannabis plant, other ingredients. And there's even research that patients shop for cannabis products that have multiple components to them. So, I think it's an interesting speculation. And I think, especially in like rheumatoid arthritis and other arthritis conditions, people have reported at least subjective pain scores. And there's been some limited research in the area. This might be helpful, but, we have not gotten to the point where people have said, let's take a bunch of people who've been using THC for 20 years, and measure their bone density. I think in the U.S., given enough time, we will have a large enough population to recruit from to do that study. But I think that would sort of be the next step, to start to look at what is bone health in people who have used cannabis consistently throughout their adult life or something like that. It'd be interesting to see. Or if people have started using it when they've got a diagnosis or have started to experience joint pain or osteoarthritic pain, is it actually impacting the cells? I mean, all the machinery is there, the receptors are there, but is it in fact happening? We don't know for sure. It happens in a petri dish. If you have a petri dish with osteoarthritis,
Can you give us the link to that paper, to your work? You can either email it to me or post it here. I'm
yeah,
sure.
I have to find. I think we have some posters and abstracts, but yeah, I can send that along. I think my thesis is publicly available.
Okay, I'll dig into that then. Let's see, what other things did I write down here? I really liked how you described, the concept of balance and harmony as something that's not, stagnant, but rather about movement. And I was always fascinated by the concept of dynamic equilibrium and chemistry. So I do find that it translates a lot, and it helps me understand the concept of flow and flux much better. And can you just like expand on that a little bit? Because I made that connection, but I feel like I want some more info on that.
Right. I think so. Some other ways to think about it, right? And I guess pulling it back to the slow aspect of Tai Chi and why they want to slow people down a little bit. And it's kind of like this concept that, like, when we look at nature, does nature ever like rush the sunset? Does it, it happens at a very consistent, slow way. There's no like, oh, rush in nature. Everything happens in harmony, right? Everything is gradual. It shifts, it changes, it cycles. And when things become kind of stagnant, that nothing's happening. That's when I think systems break. There isn't progress. There isn't movement. And there's a lot of like paradoxes and fun things in the Tai Chi classics, like soft overcomes hard, and they talk about water and carving through rocks and things like that as an example of this slow process of change. And so they actually embrace change and this, again, dynamic equilibria, this harmony, this sort of balance between things. Because again, you wouldn't necessarily want, even in biology, you wouldn't want to have an intoxicant at a super high level in your body. You put it in there and that's it. It's in there forever, right? It metabolizes, it gets excreted, it gets broken down. And I think that we think about this concept. I think about the concept a lot with, when we do certain behaviors, like whether it's drinking caffeine or alcohol or other things, we put so much of it into our body that eventually our body says, oh, like our brain will be like, oh, must be normal. Every day around 4 o'clock, a bunch of cannabinoids come into my brain, or every morning I get a few hundred milligrams of caffeine. This must be normal. After enough time has passed, and your body starts to change and expect that. And so when you don't get it, that's when we start to get some sort of imbalances where we're like, hey, our body thought this was normal. This was our new sort of homeostatic level. And then we have to start to change from there. And so I think a lot of these processes, these balances are really kind of everywhere. And I think the philosophy, I think, is an underrated tool. And I think wish they taught more of it in grad school, not just in basic undergrad, for helping to develop concepts and ways of understanding biological processes, chemical processes, natural history, and ways of potentially even developing some hypotheses around that, because you have conceptual frameworks, you have things, analogies, concepts in the larger world that you can compare it to. And I think that is super helpful. So that was my
Yeah, no, I liked it. I like the tangents off too. That's the point of a discussion. You start talking about something, and then you connect it in your head to something else, and let's go on that tangent. I love it. And I also thought it's super, super cool, like how you describe the difference between the effects of Tai Chi and on one hand, and then on the other hand, meditation and yoga and some of the other more well-known wellness approaches. And also, like, super interesting how Tai Chi puts the system in a less reactive state, as opposed to just adding more compounds of the ones that we think we need in there to change something. So I thought that that's really fascinating, and even just philosophically, it was very powerful. So do you have any ideas, or do you want to speculate on why those other systems are, or the practices are different?
Yeah, I think it's fun to speculate on these things. So when I think of things like running, I think of moving a bit quickly, more intense. There's a lot of stuff happening, right? Maybe you're burning more energy reserves to do that activity. There's also the runner's high. There's a bit of a not so subtle reward for doing intense exercise. And then there are people who, again, are very serious about running and aerobic exercise because of how it makes them feel, at least mentally. And they deal with the physical soreness and tiredness later on. So I think that there are different types of rewards out there. And sometimes it's like the body high is great, from doing a bunch of yoga, going on a long, hard hike or jog or lifting weights. We wouldn't do it if it didn't benefit us in some way, or we didn't feel a benefit. We are rewarded for those behaviors. And the other concept that I thought about as well, maybe another rewarding effect is being not, maybe it's not the runner's high, but maybe it's clarity. Maybe it's being more coherent. Maybe it's being really calm and accessing other experiences. Again, there's this concept of like flow states or flow-like states where things, seem to happen with what they call effortless action. I don't know if I've ever experienced that, but definitely, I've been in the zone. I mean, we talked about this when editing papers, right? It's like you get in the zone and suddenly 4 hours have gone by and you're like, whoa, that was like, it just like went poof. And I do feel tired, but like it was almost like somewhat easy to do this. And I think that is more, I think the flavor of Tai Chi is more in this calm, effortless action aligned with natural principles. That's the ancient philosophy. I think in modern times we'd call it more like a flow state, which I think is not the same as a runner's high or the experience, the rewarding properties from endorphins and endocannabinoids from like strenuous exercise that people experience. They both are great. I'm a fan of both, but I think that distinction is important. And I think what fascinated me, and one of the reasons I want to talk about this is, it's not, I try to do things that don't have to do with work, and then it seems like I find these connections between other dimensions of my life and work. And I found it interesting that exercise generally by itself raises endocannabinoids. Meditation by itself has been shown to raise endocannabinoids. Yoga, just as a yoga practice, going through the postures and movements, is associated with raising endocannabinoid activity. And then when you have a practice that kind of combines elements of those, you get the opposite effect. And I thought that was really interesting, and definitely, as I guess as the saying go, would like to see more research into if we combine meditation with a movement practice, does it, tenfold increase,
additive effects? Yeah.
or does it take it in a different direction?
Yeah.
And so I found that to be interesting, but I don't know if, I guess the proof would be if people do Tai Chi, lose weight or something, because it, makes the endocannabinoid system less active and you're not getting as much appetite signals or something. But I think
I guess I'll have to experiment on myself and take notes and all right, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you everyone for joining us. Big thank you to Dr. Marcu. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll be back next week with a new session. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good day. Bye.